Hey everyone, welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to be here with all of you. Glad to be here. We're going to have another great chat here tonight. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We are streaming now on YouTube. We are streaming now on Facebook, and we're about to be streaming. Just hit the button. We're now streaming on Rockfin. We are streaming on all platforms. This will be on Rumble afterwards. This will be on Odyssey afterwards. We're all here. Tweet this out. Invite your friends. Let's have a great stream tonight.
American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. The way we do things, for those of you who may not be familiar, is I give my opening remarks. While I give my opening remarks, I am writing down people's super chat questions. So if there's something you would like me to talk about in the second half of the show, shoot me a super chat. I will be typing it down. I'll type your super chat and put it on the list. Then we'll do the roll call after my opening remarks. And then from there, I will start answering super chats for the rest of the night. So that's how the second half of the show goes, is I answer super chat questions. So if there's something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, send me a super chat and we will do that. If everyone can tweet this out, let's bring a bigger crowd here to talk. Always good to have a good crowd of people to jump on these streams and have a good conversation. Always fun to do that. So yeah, I'm going to jump into my opening remarks for tonight. I'll be writing down any super chats that come in as we do that. Now, the first thing's out of the way. Usually in my opening remarks, I get into a lot of historical stuff, a lot of ideological stuff, a lot of deep economic theory, and we're going to go there tonight. But there are two current events that I just have to comment on before we get into the deeper, theoretical, ideological stuff. And shout out to Peter Coffin, who's in the chat. Peter Coffin is awesome. He's doing great work. You should go watch his very important documentaries. We love you, Peter. We love your hard work, and it was great having you at the conference. Peter is awesome. But anyhow, folks, I want to comment on the Restrict Act. I don't know if people know about the Restrict Act, but the Restrict Act is this law that is in the works right now. And this law, they're presenting it as the TikTok ban. It is so much more than the TikTok ban. It basically gives the executive branch of the U.S. government, the Secretary of Commerce, the right to declare anything to be a threat to national security, to be a foreign asset, seize people's property, seize people's computers, no right to privacy, no right to due process. It is a really scary piece of legislation that they can basically declare anyone or anything that they consider to be connected to Iran or Cuba or Russia or China or Venezuela, anything that they declare to be connected to those countries to be a threat to national security, and they can seize it. It is an unbelievably dangerous piece of legislation. Unbelievably dangerous. And writing it down. And I mean, it's an unbelievable unbelievably awful piece of legislation. You can just forget your civil liberties. You can forget your right to watch RT. You can forget the right to watch CGTN. You can forget the right to watch Press TV. It would make using a VPN to look at a website, that would make that a crime, because if they consider you're trying to avoid being detected looking at a website or doing a transaction, it would make, basically using a VPN could be considered a very serious crime. We got to stop the Restrict Act. And I think there's a very good chance it will not pass, because a number of voices are coming out swinging against it. A number of Republicans are against it, Rand Paul among them. Even AOC, she's bad on a lot of things, but even AOC is against it. The White House is for it. A number of neocon Republicans are for it, but there's a lot of people who are saying, wait a second, hold up. You're going to make it a serious crime to use a VPN. You're going to give the federal government, the executive branch, the right to declare anything that they think might be connected to a list of countries. You can't do that. So I'm hoping that it doesn't pass, and I'm trying to mobilize everyone to raise awareness about how dangerous this piece of legislation is. I did a story about it for RT. The Mises Caucus of the Libertarian Party has done a great job raising awareness about the Restrict Act and how dangerous it is. One thing I will say, though, is I have seen at least two videos, one from Babylon Bee and one from Lauren Southern, and on a lot of smaller right-wing YouTube channels, I've seen this, that are like, TikTok is lame, TikTok is liberal, TikTok is woke, yeah, we should outlaw it, support the Restrict Act. And I want to smack Lauren Southern. I want to smack Babylon Bee. I like a lot of Babylon Bee's content. Sometimes I like some of Lauren Southern's content, not very often, very rarely, but occasionally she has a good take. But I want to smack both of them, because it's like, who cares if TikTok is lame? Oh, TikTok is woke. They have this whole thing, libs of TikTok. It's not about TikTok. It's about so much more than TikTok. Okay? It is about so much more than TikTok, and John McCarthy is absolutely right. Tulsi Gabbard is speaking up against it. Tucker Carlson is against it. Anyone who's got any shred of like civil liberties, in their guts has to be against the Restrict Act. We need to stick it to Lauren Southern. We need to stick it to Babylon Bee, because these videos they're making to promote the Restrict Act are so unbelievably deceptive, right? It's like this, like, dude, bro, don't you hate TikTok? It's lame and liberal and gay. And it's like, okay, so how does that translate to the government should be able to throw me in jail for using a fucking VPN? I hate it when I see lying like this, right? It's like TikTok being lame, TikTok being full of liberal, crazy, woke people is not a justification for me being jailed for using a VPN, for the government being able to seize my bank accounts because they claim without any evidence, that, you're too friendly to Cuba or something like this. It is an unbelievably repressive piece of legislation. And they're calling it a TikTok ban, but it is way, way more than that. And it infuriates me to see so many conservatives that claim they're fighting the system, they're fighting the deep state, when they're lining up to pass a law that would basically give the deep state the power to seize all of your property. And it is really, 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 really an awful piece of legislation. So I would encourage people, especially if you're one of the people that pays more attention to right-wing media, right? I've come out against BreadTube and challenged them, but I'm not really on the right. I'm not a libertarian. I'm a socialist. I'm an anti-imperialist, But if you're in that right-wing sphere, take it into Lauren Southern's chat. Take it into the chat of any libertarian or Trumper who is supporting this bill needs to look themselves in the mirror and say, wait a second, hold up, right? It's like, you're mad that they're jailing Donald Trump and all of this. Like, this would give them such amazing repressive power. It is a horrendous piece of legislation. So I wanted to say that. The second thing I wanted to point out is the situation on Taiwan right now, right? So Tsai Ing-wen, president of Taiwan, visited the United States twice. And then the head of the U.S. Foreign Affairs Committee visited Taiwan, and in Taiwan, he gave a speech comparing the president of China, Xi Jinping, to Hitler. I kid you not. The head of the U.S. Foreign Affairs Committee for the U.S. House of Representatives went to Taiwan and gave a speech, and in that speech, he compared Xi Jinping of China to Hitler. So, of course, China is demonstrating to Taiwan as Taiwan continues to inch toward independence, as it's buying all kinds of U.S. weapons. And, of course, the Chinese military is doing drills and demonstrating, look, we have the ability to encircle Taiwan if we need to. And like, this should be a moment where you should ask yourself, hello, if something happens on Taiwan, immediately their violins are going to come out and they're going to be like, oh, those poor people of Taiwan. Oh, look what evil China is doing. It's like, they don't care about the people of Taiwan. You want the people of Taiwan were perfectly fine. One country, two systems, right? It was fine. There were Taiwanese companies doing business on the Chinese mainland. One country, two systems. But the United States is trying to escalate with China. So it's pouring loads of weapons into Taiwan. It's bringing Tsai Ing-wen to the United States. It's sending members of Congress to give fiery anti-Chinese speeches on the island of Taiwan. They are setting the people up of Taiwan up for a military confrontation. Take China out of the picture, right? Pretend that you don't like China. Pretend that every anti-communist, anti-China lie you've ever heard is true. What they're doing is still bullshit, because they're basically setting up for the people of Taiwan to have their country turned into a battlefield. That's not what you do if you care about people. And the people of Taiwan don't want this. They've been voting for the KMT, the Kuomintang KMT Nationalist Party. They've been voting for them instead of the pro-independence party because they don't want a war. They don't want a war. And it's just like how the U.S. imperialists, they play a violin for Ukraine. When they set up, they arranged the whole thing. They did everything they possibly could do to force Russia to militarily intervene in Ukraine. Now they're trying their hardest to get a lot of people on the island of Taiwan killed. That's what they're doing. They're trying to get people on the island of Taiwan killed. And then they can sit back and say, oh, look how evil China is. And they set the whole thing up. I mean, that's what's going on here. So, I want to be clear about those two issues. Those are two current events that I wanted to start out talking about. We need to raise holy hell about this goddamn Restrict Act, and really especially call out anyone who claims to be edgy and against the deep state who's promoting it, because I don't like TikTok. I mean, give me a break, right? And second of all, we need to point out that the USA is setting up a lot of people on the island of Taiwan to be, miserable, to have to flee their homes, to have their country turned into a battlefield. They don't care about Taiwan. What they're doing with Taiwan right now is putting the people on Taiwan in danger. So we need to point both of those things out, and raise a lot of awareness about both of those issues. Terry Barnes, he says, the USA is the arsonist that calls the fire department after the house is engulfed in flames. That's exactly as a perfect analogy, Terry. It's a perfect analogy. So I just want you all to be aware of those two issues. I couldn't do my stream tonight without highlighting those two important issues. Now, tomorrow night, or the next time I do a stream, might be tomorrow night, might be Friday, I'm going to talk about some other current events. I'm going to have some fun with some of my critics. There's been some new videos that have been made about me lately, not from the BreadTube universe, but from the anti-China sphere. We're going to have some fun with that. So stay tuned for that, right? We love to talk about current events and drama related to, CPI or our community here. But tonight, we're going to go back into history, and we're going to talk about the term revolution and what revolution actually means in our time, because there's a lot of confusion about where the word revolution came from, what revolution meant in the 1800s and the 20th century, and what revolution means now. And it's this kind of stuff that gets me to why CPI acts differently. The Center for Political Innovation, we act differently than other leftist groups. We raise the slogan, out of the movement to the masses. We wave the American flag. We love our country. We put forward a program to improve the country, an economic program to improve the lives of the American working class. Why do we do that? Well, in order to understand this from one important angle, you need to understand the term revolution and the history. What does the term revolution actually literally mean? What does it mean? Well, it comes from Latin. In Latin, the word revolutio means to turn around. That's what it means, turn around. That's what the word revolution actually means. It means turn around. To turn around. If I spun in a circle, I'd be having a revolution. That's what the word actually means. And it's gotten this whole political connotation because of a lot of complicated history that you need to understand if you want to understand politics in our time. It's gotten all muddled and confused. When you think of revolution, you think of people storming the barricades, you think of the government being overthrown, maybe you think of 1776 and guys in tri-cornered hats with muskets, maybe you think of the Bolsheviks. It's got a whole different meaning now. But the origin of the word revolution just means to turn around. And the reason that it took on a revolutionary connotation was because prior to the rise of modern capitalism, you had feudalism in Europe. And in feudalism, the Roman Catholic Church had absolute power. It was the state religion, and the state got its authority, its divine right from the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church preached that the earth was the center of the universe. That's what the Catholic Church believed, that the earth was the center of the universe, that the stars and the planets and all of them were centered around the earth. And first it was Copernicus, later it was Galileo and others, through their use of primitive telescopes and their use of mathematics and astronomy, they began to think that the earth was not the center of the universe, but rather that the earth was revolving around the sun. That's what they believed. They believed that the earth was revolving around the sun. Some of them were what you might call heliocentrists, meaning they thought the sun was the center of the universe. Now, others moved away from that. But there started to be a belief among educated folks that the sun was the center of the universe, or that the earth was revolving around the sun. Now, some people have said, and I think this is interesting, that it's possible that Copernicus was involved in some kind of mystical pagan religious group that worshiped the sun. And that's why he was determined to prove via mathematics that the earth was actually revolving around the sun, and the sun was the center of the universe. Maybe that's true. Doesn't matter, though. Does not matter, because he didn't prove based on his mystical beliefs. He proved with a telescope and he proved with mathematics that the earth was not the center of the universe. And so, as this belief started to emerge in the 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, there started to emerge people who were saying that actually the earth was not the center of the universe, but rather the earth was revolving. Those people were called revolutionaries because they believed that the earth was revolving. The people that were called revolutionaries were just people who believed in science. They were questioning the teachings of the Roman Catholic Church. Many of them were burned at the stake. Many of them were killed. Galileo was threatened with torture and confined to house arrest for his whole life. If you read the book that Copernicus wrote, On the Revolution of Heavenly Spheres, was the book he wrote, arguing that, in fact, the earth was not the center of the universe. If you read the text, he has the opening written by a priest, and he spends the whole opening almost apologizing for his beliefs, trying to prove how religious he is, because he knows what he's saying is, I mean, it was like confessing a crime. He was saying that, the earth was not the center of the universe. He was going against the Catholic Church teaching. He was saying that he, with his telescope and his mathematics, knew more than the Pope. That was a very serious crime. That's the origin of the term. It meant science. It meant the scientific method. It meant discourse and debate. That's what it originally meant. Then we understand that those who questioned feudalism, those who opposed the feudal hierarchies, began organizing. You had uprisings and revolts among the peasants. Then you had, in France, the French Revolution. And this was an uprising against the Catholic Church and against feudalism. And it was called a revolution because it was led by people who believed in science, people who believed that religion was a tool used to oppress people, to hold back historical progress. And the French Revolution was a big, dramatic, violent political event. But it was done to overthrow a feudal order that said the earth was the center of the universe. And it was led by people who believed the earth revolved around the sun. And it was largely because of the French Revolution that the term revolution took on a political connotation. It started to mean a dramatic change in government. Meant the downfall of one regime and the rise of another. And that was a totally different connotation. Revolution had never meant that before. And there were different kinds of revolutions. Feudalism, the overthrow of feudalism in Britain was a kind of gradual process, with the English Civil War and Oliver Cromwell, etc. And it was a long, kind of complicated process. You had Henry VIII and his break with the Catholic Church, and then generations later, you had the English Civil War and the execution of King Charles, and it was a long process in Britain. It was long and complicated. They were overthrowing feudalism in one area while it was still intact in another. But in France, the overthrow of feudalism was a very dramatic event. The overthrow of feudalism in the 1790s in France was very, very dramatic. It was the king of France, the absolute monarch, was toppled. There was an uprising. There was an economic crisis. A famine had happened. A lot of the poor people were running to the cities because they were hungry. There was turmoil in the country. And in that moment, the third estate, the business owners, the property owners, they mobilized to smash the nobility and to smash the Catholic Church and to overthrow the monarchy. And they did. And it was called the French Revolution. And there was the famous storming of the Bastille. There was a prison in Paris, the Bastille, that was associated with the King's Terror. It was where people got disappeared to. You were considered to be an enemy of the king or a troublemaker, you might get sent to this Bastille, this building where people were supposedly tortured. So one day the French people got together and they stormed the Bastille. It was a big dramatic event, and they went in. There were only like 14 people in it. It wasn't really a big dramatic event in terms of letting prisoners go. However, it was symbolic, right? This was a symbol of oppression. There was the March to Versailles, where thousands and thousands of people marched from Paris a long way to Versailles, where the king's palace was. And they were originally marching there to beg the king to help them, to give them more food. But by the time they got there, they had been thoroughly convinced that no, they were going there to arrest the king. And so the mob, that started marching to beg the king, when they eventually got to the palace, they arrested him. The king had his head cut off. Many aristocrats had their heads cut off. And there was just a general explosion in French society. And what this was the business owners, the capitalists, seizing power from the aristocrats and the landowners. The landowners, they owned the land by hereditary. The king had his title, supposedly by divine right. And the peasants were very, very poor, and people were hungry. And in this moment, there was a great social explosion led by the capitalists. And they had many, many triumphant, glorious words to hail it with, right? In France, you have the Declaration of the Rights of Man, liberty, égalité, fraternité, right? Freedom, equality, and justice are in brotherhood, right? Liberty, it's freedom. Égalité, it's egalitarianism, equality. Fraternité is brotherhood, right? And that it was this mass uprising against feudalism. And that the French Revolution was largely giving people permission to unleash their libido. And this is very interesting. We're going to take things in a little bit of a psychological direction. Feudal society is a heavily restrictive society. You have no idea how restrictive feudalism is. It was a crime in many areas, many parts of the world, in many parts of medieval Europe. It was a very serious crime for a peasant to look one of their natural superiors in the face. Did you know this? It was actually a crime to raise your head and look in the face of a noble. If you were around somebody who was a duke or an earl or a count or whatever, a marquis or whatever, if you looked them in the face, that was a serious crime. You could be flogged for that. You could be put in prison for that. There were huge restraints put on the population. And the death penalty was used very, very liberally in feudal times. Again, anyone who said they didn't agree with the teachings of the Catholic Church, they burned you at the stake. Anyone who appeared to be, if you stole something, they hung you, right? If you stole something, they hung you. If you, disrespected a noble, you might be killed. I mean, it was a very, very heavy-handed authoritarian society in which people's every move was being heavily regulated, right? There were different words, in the English language. I don't know what it was in French, but in the English language, for example, we now call each other, if I'm talking to you, I call you you. If I'm talking about myself, I'm saying me. It used to be that was only for nobles. For common people, it was thee instead of you, and thy for me, and you and me were only for nobles, only rich people. And there were different titles, right? Different titles for people that were used, right? That people of higher rank, you had to address them differently. Social hierarchies were very, very cemented. If you were born as a peasant, you were a peasant. And if you wanted to take on another job or something, that was considered a very big sin, because God had put you on the earth to be a peasant, right? It was that highly regimented. And sex was very highly regimented. Masturbation was considered to be a very, very serious sin. Having sex outside of marriage, in many cases, was punishable by death or torture or imprisonment or serious punishment. If a child was born out of wedlock, they were a bastard. And so they were somebody who was just shamed and hated by society. And sexuality was heavily regulated. You only had sex with your married partner. You did not masturbate. Homosexuality, forget it. They killed you. Sex outside of marriage, adultery, forget it. They killed you. Woman gets pregnant out of wedlock. Oh boy, that's a nightmare. It was a very heavily regulated society. You're not looking people of a higher rank above you in the face. You have special words to refer to people above you. Your sex is highly regulated. life is very, very heavily regulated, and you're repeating religious mantras all the time. Like, for example, we say goodbye in English. What is goodbye? It means God be with you, right? That whenever you departed from someone, you had to say, God be with you, right? There was like a prayer for every occasion, right? You're repeating religious slogans and mantras constantly. Your body is constantly being regulated. You're constantly, humbling yourself before your superiors. It's a very restricted way of being. It's a very authoritarian existence. No freedom of speech, no freedom of religion, no freedom of conscience, certainly no sexual freedom to speak of. And anyone who doesn't agree with it, well, we kill you or we torture you. And in fact, killing you is not enough, right? They invent all kinds of ugly, nasty, brutal, horrible ways of killing you, right? Burning you at the stake is a much more painful way to die than hanging you. So if you go against the church, they burn you at the stake because it hurts more, right? It's a really, really rigid, authoritarian way of being. Well, the bourgeoisie comes along. People are starving to death. There's an economic crisis in the country. The bourgeoisie comes along. They say, we really want to get rid of these nobles, kings and queens. We really want to have the factory owners and the bankers be the new rulers. So what do? And again, it makes perfect sense. And it was probably the right thing to do. I'm not even saying they were necessarily wrong here. Obviously, feudalism is an awful way of existing. If I had lived in a feudal society, I would want more freedom. I would want less restriction. So it's not wrong what they did, but it just makes sense. So the bourgeoisie comes along, the capitalists, this new class that emerges. They come along and they say, hey, everybody, you know how you weren't even allowed to look your landlord or your noble in the face and you had to call him special words? Well, now you can kill him. Now you can call him every nasty name in the world and you can cut his head off and his blood will go everywhere. And all the pent up rage these people had exploded out of them. The ruling class, the new ruling class, the capitalists with their new newspapers and printing presses, they told everybody, all the pent-up anger you have, all the rage you have within yourself, all the restraint, all the feelings you've been suppressing and holding in for your whole life, boom, let them go. Let them out. And we saw what happened. The reign of terror, right? They lined up these landlords, these landowners, these nobles, and they cut their heads off. And the crowds would cheer and they'd cut their heads off and blood would be squirting out and they would all cheer and celebrate. Thousands and thousands of the old aristocracy were killed. They also did a thing where they would put them on a boat. This was another way that they would kill people. They would take a noble family and they'd put them on a little boat and they'd take them out in the middle of the ocean and they would get like a little boat and leave them there. And then just, take the ship back and just leave them there in the middle of the ocean to drown or starve or whatever. I mean, it was a really pretty authoritarian, awful way of being. Pretty horrible explosion, but it was based on years and years of restraint, and it was giving people permission to unleash their anger and rage. And it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I tend to think cruel acts of violence and vengeance and horror like that are not good, but it was rebelling against an order that had killed lots of people. Anyone who spoke critically or had an independent thought was being killed. So, it was a response to years and years of oppression, to a very restrictive, oppressive, hierarchical order. It was pretty awful. There's no way around it. It was a pretty awful society. Feudalism that had existed for a long time. It was based on a certain level of economic development. And because of the Silk Road from China and the rise of the mercantile class and the printing press and a number of different historical factors, a new economic and political order was emerging. Feudalism was ready to die. Capitalism was ready to replace it. But there was a power struggle between the feudal aristocracy and the capitalist class that wanted to replace them. And so the capitalist class, with their newspapers and their control of the means of information, gave everyone permission to unleash their rage. And they created a mass episode of violence. And they used that mass episode of violence to take power and to kill off the remnants of the old society. That was what happened. What's interesting, though, is that the French Revolution was also a sexual release. And this is something that a lot of people don't get. We don't get this in the United States, but it was also a sexual release. One of the key figures in the French Revolution was the Marquis de Sade, who was a pornographer. He was a wealthy French aristocrat, and he wrote rape porn. I don't know what to call it other than that. Rape porn, torture porn. He wrote these books before the revolution that were very pornographic and very violent and very anti-religious. If you read Marquis de Sade's writing, basically he starts lecturing you about philosophy and why the church are a bunch of hypocrites and why right and wrong don't really exist. And then it turns into a story about a woman getting raped and murdered and tortured. And she's also often being raped and murdered and tortured by priests, by nobles, by people that are supposed to be upstanding, and they're raping and torturing and murdering her while they tell her there is no real morality. Right and wrong don't really exist. It's just something for suckers. Human beings are animals. You know, I mean, it's libertarian writing in a lot of ways, right? It's saying that there is no real ethical morality. Right and wrong are not really in existence, but rather people should just live for pleasure and pursue their own self-interest. And it's celebrating sexuality, and it's seeing women as simply property, seeing women as simply objects through which men can attain pleasure, and kind of glorifying men's cruelty against women. It's pretty awful stuff. Pretty awful stuff. You know, but the Marquis de Sade, this guy who wrote these awful things, people don't realize how important the Marquis de Sade was in the French Revolution. This guy was a decisive figure in the French Revolution. You know, he'd written these dirty books that everyone was reading, and he'd been thrown in prison for doing so. And he was in the Bastille. And he was in the Bastille, and the Bastille, that prison that the French king had, was pretty empty. But he was one of the only people in it. And so in order to get attention for himself, he stuck his head out of the windows and was saying, "Oh my God, they're torturing people." And he was stirring up the crowds outside. And he was stirring up people through the windows of the Bastille and claiming that torture was going on and stirring people up, so much so they took him to another jail because it was a problem that he was doing that. But then it was a couple weeks later that they stormed the Bastille, you know, and that Marquis de Sade, you know, he was eventually freed by the revolution. And he started writing his pornographic, dirty, you know, sadistic, violent books. You know, he started writing them everywhere he could. I mean, and these books were a very big part of the French Revolution, right? He wrote pamphlets saying that they needed to mandate state atheism. He has a pamphlet, I believe, that he wrote, like, "Frenchmen, let's go one step further." He said it wasn't enough to just abolish the king. We need to abolish all religion. And they tried to do that during the French Revolution. They converted the churches to what they called temples of reason. And they were places where scientists would give lectures on science. They didn't have church services. They executed a lot of priests. And the idea was that, you know, that they were going to, at the same time, they were giving everyone permission to unleash their anger and their rage at the old order. At the same time, they were giving people permission to be as sexual as they wanted to be. You know, and you have a lot of writing advocating free love, etc. The Marquis de Sade, you know, what happens? Well, the Reign of Terror happens. And after they've executed a lot of people from the old order, the revolutionaries start executing each other. They start accusing different people among the revolutionary movement of being sellouts. The Jacobins are fighting the Girondists. And there's a lot of revolutionary on revolutionary violence. Feminists were executed. That was a thing. Among the French revolutionaries, there were some who said women should have equal rights. Why just men? And there were some of the French Revolution of the women who said women should have equal rights. And well, everyone else said, no, we can't do that. And they cut their heads off, right? And there were a lot of executions of former revolutionaries, right? The Reign of Terror went from being the execution of the old order. It became a fight among the revolutionaries. And it's getting particularly ugly. And a lot of people among the population are going, we're a little tired of this. Can we get back to normal? This is pretty bloody. This is pretty awful. This is pretty horrible. So the Marquis de Sade is seeing that the revolutionary energy is kind of dying among the French population. And he says, we have to keep the revolutionary energy going. We got to keep the people stirred up because this is the march of the future. The revolution is the glorious thing. It's the unleashing of the human spirit. We got to tear down the old order. And, Marquis de Sade, he was writing sadistic pornography about rape and murder and torture beforehand. And then it started happening. It was like living. So he's livid. He's enjoying it. It's great. And he starts to see the revolutionary energy start to die down. So he writes a pamphlet, the Marquis de Sade, and he says, in order to keep the French Revolution going, in order to keep the energy of the French Revolution going, we need to set up theaters across France where naked women will sit on display and men can walk into the theaters and look at the naked women. Very odd, isn't it? Of all the things to do to keep the revolution going, why would you do that? But that's what he says. In order to keep the revolutionary energy going, we need theaters, and we'll put naked women in the theaters. Men will go into the theaters, they'll look at the naked women, and they'll get so sexually aroused and turned on, the revolution will keep going. That shows you how much the violence and terror of the French Revolution and the sexual liberation element were combined. And of course, what eventually happens is Napoleon seizes power. And Napoleon seizes power and he compromises with the old order, right? Napoleon proclaims himself the emperor, and he brings back the Roman Catholic Church to France. But at the same time, he keeps, feudalism is overturned, and he brings a meritocracy into the military. He outlaws the aristocracy. He declares, that he's the revolution in boots. He's going to march the ideals of the French Revolution across Europe. And the rise of Napoleon marks the end of the French Revolution. And of course, what does Napoleon do? He throws Marquis de Sade in a mental hospital. He throws the Marquis de Sade in a mental hospital, and Marquis de Sade continues writing his pornographic novels, and they're sneaking them out of the mental hospital, and Napoleon's outlawing it, arresting people for selling them. He's saying no more of this. And that's the French Revolution. And what is important about this, the whole reason I'm talking about the French Revolution, is because the French Revolution was it was the model of the revolutionary movements that came later. For example, Trotsky. Well, before we get to Trotsky, let's talk to Marx, right? What is one of the most important pamphlets by Karl Marx that I frequently refer to, that I quote extensively? It's very, very important. It's this one, the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. What the hell is a Brumaire, right? The name of this pamphlet is what? When I first heard people reference this pamphlet, the 18th Brumaire, what the hell is a Brumaire? Well, after the French Revolution, they decided they didn't like the traditional calendar with 12 months. They thought it wasn't scientific. So they started a new calendar with 10 months in it. And one of the months was Brumaire. That's one of the months of the French Revolutionary calendar. Well, of course, nobody knows that because we don't use the French Revolutionary calendar. But Karl Marx knew it, and all of his buddies knew it. And this date, the 18th Brumaire, that refers to the day that Napoleon seized power. The day Napoleon seized power and basically ended the French Revolution was the 18th Brumaire. So this pamphlet by Marx is a play on the history of the French Revolution. He's talking about when Napoleon's nephew seized power a generation later, and he's talking about the day that Napoleon's nephew seized power was the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. Instead of the original 18th Brumaire of Napoleon, this is the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. And he's comparing the seizure of power, the coup by the original Napoleon, to his nephew. Well, there's a reason that Karl Marx gave his pamphlet a name like that. There's a reason for that, because the French Revolution was the point of reference for the leftist or revolutionary movement. The term left, right? The concept of the left and the right comes out of the French Revolution. After the king was overthrown, they established a National Assembly. And the National Assembly was an elected body representing the new ruling class. The people that were more radical and wanted to abolish everything to do with the old monarchy sat on the left. And the people that were more conservative, still liked the king, etc., they sat on the right. And that's where left and right comes from. The more radical supporters of the French Revolution sat on the left, and the more conservative people that were still sympathetic to the monarchy sat on the right. And the political current that we call the left generally referred to people that were in line with the ideals of the French Revolution. They wanted to march into the future. They wanted to destroy the remnants of feudalism, etc. For a while, the people that sat on the left of the French National Assembly called themselves the innovators. And then later, socialism emerged. And this is really important to remember, is that socialism as a movement emerged in the aftermath of the French Revolution. The French Revolution had happened. Capitalism was the new system. Monarchies were overthrown. It was a great brand new day. A brand new day for everybody. Liberty, equality, fraternity. We have a new just society. No more kings. We get to elect our leaders, etc. And there was still a lot of injustice. And there was a lot of people who looked around after the French Revolution and they said, wait a second. We stormed the Bastille. We cut off the heads of all the old monarchs. We tore apart the old social order. We did all of this, but the world is still full of injustice. And in the pamphlet that we recently republished, Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, they talk about how the early socialists, the first people to use the word socialism, the first person to ever use the word socialism was Henry Saint-Simon. Henry Saint-Simon was a French guy, and he was religious, and he basically started arguing that liberalism, the ideology of individual rights, was kind of destroying French society. And so he said, in opposition to liberalism that emphasizes the individual, he didn't talk about capitalism. The word capitalism, no one had ever heard of capitalism before. But he said this liberalism, this belief in individual rights, the ideology of the French Revolution, liberalism, has some big problems. So in response to liberalism, we're going to have socialism. And socialism just meant, instead of putting the individual above all else, we're going to put the interests of society above all else. We're going to be concerned with society as a whole, not just the individual. And Henry Saint-Simon, he started some worker cooperatives. He did a lot of charity, fed people. And he was just basically saying that the new society we've created in the aftermath of the French Revolution, feudalism was bad, sure, but the society we created is full of injustice. People are still being badly mistreated. People are not being kind to each other. There's a lot of inequality. And this is bad. Henry Saint-Simon comes along. Then later, in Britain, you get a guy named Robert Owen. And Robert Owen is from Wales, and he's a factory owner. He's a wealthy factory owner, but he's just a nice guy. And he owns a factory, and he sees the way his workers are being treated. They live in poverty, much shorter life expectancy. They don't see doctors when they're sick. And he says, this isn't right. This isn't good. And he's, very spiritual and religious. He's a critic of existing religion, but he's also into all kinds of mystical religious stuff. And so Robert Owen starts using the word that Henry Saint-Simon invented, socialism, in English, and saying we need socialism as opposed to capitalism. And he goes to a place in Scotland called Lanark, and he sets up a model socialist city called New Lanark. And it's a city where everyone shares the wealth in common. The workers are owners of the factories. They make sure that everyone has what they need. They train people to do crafts like wood carving, etc. It's a little commune in Scotland. He does that, and eventually he decides to move to the United States of America, and he sets up in Indiana, and he sets up a commune in Indiana called New Harmony, and it's still there. It's like a historical landmark in Indiana, New Harmony, Indiana, and it's the same kind of thing. It's a little commune. The factories are collectively owned. People get paid, a decent wage and taken care of. They have good quality schools. And it's the idea is we're going to build our like model socialist community somewhere. That's the idea. That's the idea. And that was the beginning of socialism as a movement. It came out of the disappointment with the French Revolution. But the French Revolution was the point of reference, and that's why I'm talking about it, right? We talked about where the word revolution came from. We talked about the events of the French Revolution, how the French Revolution was an explosion of sex and violence. It was allowing people to unleash their rage and anger, giving a very regulated and constrained people the right to burst forth with their libidinal release, right? That's what that's called. Libidinal release, sex and violence, the urge for sex and violence no longer being restrained. It was an explosion of libidinal release. But it didn't create a fair and just society. It created a very authoritarian society. It created a society with lots of inequality. It didn't deliver on its promises. It didn't create an ideal world. Marxism as a movement emerged after Henry Saint-Simon, after Robert Owen, after all kinds of people across Europe were talking about socialism. Socialism became a trendy new term, right? As you had a new layer of wealthy people that emerged, right? A lot of people are opening factories and becoming wealthier. Those people, just like anybody else, they were socially conscious. And they saw the poverty that was existing. They saw the hunger that existed among the poor. They saw the conditions in the factories, the child labor, and many among the wealthy. They started to have a social conscience. And so they started listening to people like Robert Owen and people like Henry Saint-Simon, who would give lectures about maybe we could have a more egalitarian society. We could have a society without poverty, without hunger. And there were many different socialists going around Europe at this time. And they tended to go around, these big urban centers. This is where you get what they call the salon culture, right? In the lead up to the French Revolution, the radicals, the people that wanted to overthrow the king, would gather in these places and read books to each other and debate each other. And the places they gathered were called salons, right? Now we think of a hair salon, but it was just a place to hang out and talk about ideas, a salon, right? And they were called salons. And it was just where all the French intellectuals would get together. And eventually, you have the rise of the cafes where you can drink coffee while you argue about politics or debate people. Right? And you have the cafes and the salons of Paris. Pretty soon they have cafes and salons in Berlin. They have cafes and salons in London. They have cafes and salons in Vienna. And wealthy people who have a lot of time and are interested in politics and are interested in culture and changing the world, are interested in art, right? Let's not forget other interests. They're interested in art, music. They're interested in psychology. They're interested in occult mysticism and obscure non-mainstream religious practices. There becomes this whole culture that develops throughout Europe that you can call salon culture or bohemianism. Have you ever heard the term bohemian? It refers to this trend of people that, for whatever reason, they have the time and they have the intellectual interest to pursue obscure things that normal people don't have the time or interest to pursue, right? Your average French factory worker is working in a factory raising a family. He doesn't have time for this, right? Your average, your average peasant or farmer, they don't have time for this. But there's a growing number of people. There's like a layer in the emerging capitalist society, usually students around the universities, but not always, who are interested in these kinds of things. And they can hang out in cafes and salons and listen to lectures. And they tend to be interested in things that are not of interest to most of the population. Most of the population are Catholic or Protestant. These people are interested in paganism. Some of these people are atheists. Some of these people are pantheists. Some of these people adopt Buddhism or religions from the East, but they're straying from the norm when it comes to religion. Some of these people are really interested in music, right? And they want to do things in music that have never been done before. Beethoven comes out of the revolutionary intelligentsia. He dedicated his third symphony to Napoleon, the Eroica, right? And these people are doing experiments in music and art that have never been done before. And that these salons that exist, it's a privileged strata of society, no doubt. But at the same time, it's a layer of society that is more interested in digging into deep questions, etc. There is a layer within the salon culture that is very interested in socialism. And what is socialism? At that point, it just means a society where the economy is organized to be nicer. It doesn't really have a definition. It means not capitalism. The word capitalism is starting to come into use. 1840s, 1830s, people are starting to talk about capitalism. In Denmark, I believe some of these economists are talking about capitalism. And then there's this talk of socialism. We need to reorganize society around socialist lines. Various socialist leaders go around and they all have a blueprint, like a model of the ideal socialist society. You get, various famous socialists from that period. It was the guy who wrote The Philosophy of Poverty. What was his name? Proudhon. You get Proudhon. You get. There's all kinds of them, right? There's a number of them. Babeuf and who else? Ferdinand Lassalle and Louis Auguste Blanqui, and there's just this whole culture. Marxism started there. That's where Marxism started. The Marxist movement started among the rich people, among the salons, among this revolutionary intelligentsia of people who had been through the French Revolution, had been through the overthrow of feudalism, saw that the world was very unjust, tended to be quite economically privileged, and wanted to engage with ideas about how to make the world better. That's why, for example, Karl Marx insists that he is a scientific socialist, right? He's a scientific socialist. He is not a utopian socialist. He's a scientific socialist. Why? Because everything new and modern and exciting is scientific, right? This is the 1800s, you have to remember. No, we're not having any of that old religious nonsense. No, he's breaking with old ideas. He's scientific. Karl Marx writes the Communist Manifesto, not the Socialist Manifesto, the Communist Manifesto. Why? Because he's got this very unique, special brand of socialism. It's different than all the others. It's called communism. Karl Marx is competing with all these other speakers, writers, performers who are going around to speak to all the different salons and cafes. So Marx, most of his writing is polemical. He writes The Poverty of Philosophy. It's a critique of Proudhon. It's a dig. Proudhon wrote a book called The Philosophy of Poverty. So Karl Marx is like, well, I'm going to write a rebuttal called The Poverty of Philosophy. Almost everything that Marx writes is a polemic against another socialist leader, because he was trying to prove that he was the best. He was the type of socialism you should be. He was the scientific socialist. He was the modern socialist. He had the correct understanding. All these other guys don't get it. He's got it. Critique of the Goethe program, All of Marx's big works are polemics because he's trying to prove that he's the right one. And to be fair, Marx's socialism is different than all of these other people's socialism for one key reason. Marx says the socialist movement should support labor unions. That's really the big difference. All these other guys have their complex blueprints of the ideal society drawn up. And we're going to do this, and this is how we'll organize the food, and this is how we're going to organize. But Marx is saying it's not going to come from my mind. It's not going to come from me drawing a blueprint. If we really want to get socialism and overthrow capitalism, we need to organize the working class. And already at this time, the workers in Britain had formed the Chartist movement. Labor unions are forming. And Marx says that's where socialism is going to come from. It's going to come from the labor unions, the workers, the proletariat. They are going to, in the Communist Manifesto, he says they're going to form combinations where labor unions, they're going to start coming together in their poverty to fight against their employers. That's where the revolution is going to come from. It's the class struggle. This is what Robert Owen and Henry Saint-Simon and all these other guys, Proudhon and Lassalle, none of them understood this. But Marx said that socialism isn't going to come out of his head. It's going to come from different forces in society clashing with each other. And the working class, the factory workers, fighting against the factory owners, that's going to be the energy that brings down capitalism. Socialism is going to come from the class struggle. That's Marxism. That's what makes Marxism unique. And so Karl Marx is telling these people in these salons, we need to go organize the workers. We need to go build labor unions. And we need to transform the labor unions from being simply economic and fighting for their individual workers and their individual factory. We need to make it political. We need to transform the economic struggle into a political struggle. And instead of just workers organizing in their factory for a better contract and higher wages, what we need is we need the workers to form a political party and try to seize control of the government. That's what Karl Marx is arguing. He's arguing that the workers' movement should become a political movement. And he's arguing that the labor unions should not simply represent the workers of their individual workplace, but rather they should become organizing centers of the entire class. That's what Marx is arguing. And Marxism as a movement proliferates because of this idea. Karl Marx is saying to these revolutionary intellectuals, let's get out of our salons. Let's get out of our cafes. Let's organize some goddamn unions. And let's have those unions organize a political party. And let's have that political party take control of the government. And when they take control of the government, when they win the battle for democracy, that will be the dictatorship of the proletariat. Right now, Marx argues, we have the dictatorship of the capitalists. What we need now is the dictatorship of the proletariat. That's what Marx is arguing. And eventually Marx develops his understanding of how capitalism, poverty amid plenty, overproduction, etc. That's what Marx is arguing. But, and this is what's important, is that Marxism does have its origins in those revolutionary intelligentsia. In this middle class or upper middle class, wealthy revolutionary intelligentsia. And because of that, Marxism, it still bears some of those tendencies. The revolutionary intelligentsia, they have that in Russia too. In Russia, they have a revolutionary intelligentsia. Russia, unlike Western Europe, Russia maintains a czarist autocracy. They have an absolute monarch. But just like the other countries. In Russia, the university students, the intellectuals, and others, they're getting together. They're reading forbidden books. They're discussing things. They want to bring down the czar. They want to establish a more egalitarian society. In Russia, you have multiple revolutionary movements that form. First, the big revolutionary movement that you have in Russia is called the Narodniks, or the populists, or the peopleists. And the Narodniks believe it'll be the peasantry. It'll be the peasantry that'll lead the revolution. So they're rich, they're wealthy young people, and they go and live among the peasantry. They dress up as if they are peasants, and they fail. The peasantry doesn't want to hear it. It's kind of a cringe, embarrassing movement. They want to get the peasants to, set up communes and own their own land. Peter Kropotkin is their big intellectual. The Narodniks, the friends of the people, they're called. Doesn't work. So then after that in Russia, you've got a current of people they call the terrorists. No, that's not a slur. That's actually what they called themselves, the terrorists. And they said, well, the way we're going to bring down the czar and establish an egalitarian society is we're going to commit acts of violence. We're going to assassinate people and blow up buildings and commit acts of violence, and that's going to inspire the people to rise up. Lenin's older brother is one of these, but doesn't work. Doesn't work. And then it's Plekhanov. Plekhanov translates Marx's work into Russian, and he says, actually, it's going to be the labor unions and the factory workers. The labor movement, the industrial workers, they're going to be the basis of bringing the Russian Revolution. And so Plekhanov starts leading the Russian intellectuals to start organizing labor unions. Plekhanov recruits a guy named Lenin to join his movement. Long story short, in 1903, Lenin says, if we're going to win this thing, we got to get our shit together. Lenin's in exile. He's living in London with a bunch of other Russians who've been kicked out of Russia for their revolutionary organizing. And he has a big fight with Plekhanov. And Plekhanov wants to just keep doing things the same old way. Lenin says, oh, no, we need a party of new type. And they take a vote, and the majority of the people in the room join with Lenin to form the party of new type. And thus, the Bolsheviks are born. And Bolshevism, again, a lot of the people in the Bolshevik movement are largely middle-class students, etc. But Lenin organizes them effectively and in a disciplined manner so that they can lead the broad masses of people. He gets them to act in a way that what they do counts and wins people over. He gets them to put aside their particular individual grievances, their particular individual aspirations. He says his party of new type, is only for people who give the whole of their lives. He says, if you don't want to give the whole of your life to this, we don't want you. And the Marxists of Europe look at Lenin's organization and they say, this is not a real political party. This is a cult. They compare it to a monastic order. It's a bunch of monks selling all their possessions and giving their whole life to Christ. This is a crazy religious sect. This is a deranged secret society that Lenin's building. This is not a healthy organization. Democratic centralism. This is a deranged group. Lenin says, well, that's fine. You don't want to work with me? Don't. But if we're going to win this thing, we have to start organizing in a serious way. And the Bolsheviks are this outlier in Europe and the Marxist movement. And they come up with a whole new theory of imperialism. They say that capitalism has entered its monopoly stage of imperialism, and the nationalism of oppressed countries is revolutionary, and that it's holding back development around the world. None of the other Marxists in Europe are saying this. They're still holding on to Marx's idea that capitalism is going to spread all over the world and raise people out of poverty and lay the basis for those societies being capitalist too, But the world is changing. And the Bolsheviks, they're blazing new trail. They're coming up with new theories, and they're developing all kinds of new ideas about how to change the world. And the rest of the global Marxist movement isn't really doing what they're doing and thinks they're kind of a weird group They say, wow, Lenin, the Russians, they have these traditions of secret societies. They have these traditions. They're more of authoritarian culture. This is a weird Russian thing that this Lenin guy is doing. Trotsky, on the other hand, doesn't like Lenin, and Trotsky becomes the big, well-known Russian in exile. Trotsky and Lenin have a fight with each other. Trotsky wants to build a United States of Europe. He wants to build the European Union, basically. Lenin doesn't like that idea. So Trotsky, he's the big, well-known Russian communist. And he's going around Vienna and Berlin and eventually settles down in New York City. And he's the well-known Russian communist. But Lenin is this guy who runs an obscure sect people know about, but it's very secretive and very strange. Very strange. Then World War I happens. And the Marxist movement of Europe sells out and supports World War I. The German Social Democrats support it. The French Social Democrats support it. The British Labour Party supports it. All the big Marxist groups in Europe, they all support World War I. But Lenin and Rosa Luxemburg and Trotsky and some others, they're the few who refuse to support World War I. They don't support World War I. They're the radical left, the far left. And then Lenin writes that it's the duty of revolutionaries to turn an imperialist war into a civil war, to bring the war home, turn the guns around. That's what he writes. Turn imperialist war into civil war. And what happens? Well, the Tsar is losing the war. The monarchy in Russia is increasingly unpopular. And so the Tsar is brought down. There's kind of an uprising, and the Tsar steps down. And then Lenin meets up with German intelligence. A German intelligence officer named Alexander Parvus met with Lenin, who was in Switzerland. Lenin was living in Switzerland, which was a neutral country. And Alexander Parvus, who had been a well-known socialist, but was also known to be a German intelligence officer, met with Lenin and gave Lenin a bunch of money. We don't know how much. Gave Lenin a lot of money and a lot of support, and arranged for Lenin to get smuggled back to Russia on a train. Russia, Lenin arrives after the Tsar has been brought down. In April of 1917, Lenin shows up. He's at the Finland station. Lenin shows up. And he arrives. And he comes out. He comes to the Bolsheviks and he says, all right, we've got a chance to actually win here. This is a serious crisis. But in order to win, we have to dramatically change our tactics. And he writes what's called the April Thesis. And he changes the name to the Communist Party so that no one confuses them with the Social Democrats that sold out in support of the war. And he comes out with a whole program. The main thing is they're the party, they're the guys that want to end the war. They start organizing strikes to end the war, end Russia's involvement in World War I. There's a lot of capitalists in Russia who also want to end involvement in World War I because they're doing business with the Germans. So the Bolsheviks just become known as the big anti-war group. And the Bolsheviks are leading strikes and protests. And people in Russia don't want to keep fighting the war. And the economy is bad and people are hungry. And so then a general named Levar Kornilov decides he's going to march his soldiers from the front lines back to St. Petersburg. And he's going to establish a military dictatorship because these Bolsheviks, are out of control and there's too much chaos in the country. So General Kornilov begins marching toward St. Petersburg. And everyone in St. Petersburg is panicking because this general is marching toward the city and he's going to overthrow the provisional government. He's going to establish a dictatorship. So the Bolsheviks start fortifying the city, arming people, training people to fight, preparing for the onslaught. And eventually, the Russian government, the provisional government, opens up the armories, starts giving guns to the Bolsheviks and saying, hey, you guys are organizing the resistance. Pretty soon, the Bolshevik militia outnumbers the actual official army of the provisional government to defend the city. And word of this gets back to General Kornilov. And enough of General Kornilov's soldiers have defected and run away because they don't want to go back and kill a bunch of people in St. Petersburg. And word of how well the Bolsheviks have fortified St. Petersburg to prepare for the attack gets back to them. Kornilov turns around. He says, screw it. And he starts marching back towards the front, marching back away from the city. The Bolsheviks defeated the Kornilov reaction. And that was the decisive moment. And this is really important. Revolutions are not orgasms. Revolutions are not, movies with a climax. The Bolsheviks took power through a series of different alliances. They aligned with the capitalists who wanted to bring down the Tsar. Then they aligned with the capitalists who are against the war. And then they aligned with the provisional government, with Kerensky, to defend it against General Kornilov. And finally, after General Kornilov turns around, the Bolsheviks realize that these councils, these assemblies that they've built, these Soviets, they're called, they're basically the government at that point. Their army is bigger than the regular army. And so they decide to take power. And the Soviets, the councils that they built, declare themselves to be the government. And they declare the Soviet Republic. And that's how the Russian Revolution happened. And the Chinese Revolution is a similar story, which I'll quickly go over. In China, there was this guy named Mao. He started something called the New People's Study Group, New People's Study Society. It's a group of people who wanted to make a better China. They were, pushed to live a disciplined life, to be, loyal, to engage in personal transformation. But it was the New People's Study Group. And they boycotted Japanese goods. They were part of the widespread protests in China against the Japanese, the Japanese seizing Chinese territory, and against the Treaty of Versailles at the end of World War I. Eventually, the New People's Study Society merges into the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party enters a strategic alliance with Chiang Kai-shek. They enter a strategic alliance with Chiang Kai-shek, with Dr. Sun Yat-sen. They join the nationalist KMT movement. The Soviet Union is supporting China, building up the nationalist government of China. But Chiang Kai-shek eventually turns against the communists, starts killing the communists. The communists are forced to flee. A lot of communists are killed. Communists flee to the countryside. They start leading peasant uprisings. They attach themselves. There's already a big peasant movement going on in China. Peasants are rising up against their landlords. Mao has already written this essay in 1927 saying the way the Chinese will take power is the Chinese communists will attach themselves to the peasant movement against the landowners. Well, they do that. They join the countryside. They become leaders of the peasant movement against the landlords, redistributing the land, seizing liberated territory. Eventually, Japan invades China. And so then they become leaders of the fight against Japan. They align with the nationalist KMT to fight the Japanese invaders. all throughout World War II. They're legendary. They're heroic in fighting off the Japanese invaders. Then after World War II, Mao wants to form a coalition government with Chiang Kai-shek. And Chiang Kai-shek says, no, I will not let you participate in the elections. Then Chiang Kai-shek starts trying to disarm the communist army and re-seize the areas that the communists liberated from Japan. So the communists take up arms to defend themselves against Chiang Kai-shek. And they have yet another civil war after the Second World War. But what was the decisive factor? What was it that ultimately won the revolution for Mao? What was it? What pushed them over the edge? What was the final thing that got the Chinese Communist Party to take power? What was it? I'll show you a picture of what it was. I know I've told it to you all before, and I talk about it in the new book, but it is really important. This is a really important thing. If you want to know how revolutions actually happen, not the way you think they happen, not the way it appears in movies, but how do revolutions actually happen? What is it that brings revolutionary parties to power? What is it? What is it? It's this. This is what ultimately brought the Chinese Communist Party to power, was this. This was the golden yuan. This was the currency that Chiang Kai-shek issued. Chiang Kai-shek, the Chinese nationalist government, they're fighting a civil war against the communists. And then suddenly they have this brilliant idea. They said, let's start a new paper currency. You know, in America, they've got paper money, and in other countries, they've got paper money. So we're going to go confiscate all the gold of the rich families in China, and we're going to give them a paper currency for the gold. And they make a law that all the rich people in China have to turn over their gold to the government, and the government gives them a paper currency instead. This was the turning point. And all the richest people, the richest, wealthiest people in China, they're threatened with arrest. Some people actually get arrested. Some people get shot, so they have to give all their gold to the government. The government gives them a paper currency. And then in about a year, that paper currency is worthless. This money, this golden yuan that all the rich people had to get in exchange. They all gave up all their gold, all their jewels, all their wealth in exchange for a piece of paper. And pretty soon, this piece of paper is worthless. It's worthless. You can see a picture of it on page 205 of my new book, Where is America Going? It's worthless. And at that point, a number of the wealthiest people in China all said, fuck it. Fuck it. Anyone's got to be better. Anyone's got to be better than Chiang Kai-shek. This Mao guy, he fought against Japan. He's redistributing the land. He's got to be better than this guy. Anyone's better than this guy. And Mao makes an agreement with a lot of the wealthiest capitalists in China. We're not going to seize your property. We're only having a new democratic revolution. We're not having a socialist revolution. We're not making socialism in China. We're just making a people's democracy. We're not going to have socialism. The Communist Party is just going to lead the transition to people's democracy. The Soviet Union is going to build a bunch of power plants and factories and stuff for us. And, we'll take power and we won't nationalize your property. We won't seize your wealth, but we're going to get a whole bunch of help from the Soviet Union to build new power plants and stuff. And we're going to give land to the peasants. But don't worry, business owner. Don't worry, factory owner. Don't worry, small businessman. We're not going to touch your property. We're only having a new democratic revolution. It's not a socialist revolution. And a lot of the wealthiest capitalists in China said, okay, fine. That's how the Chinese Communist Party took power, ultimately. Now, why am I telling you all of this? We started talking about what the word revolution means. We started talking about the French Revolution and all that. Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because we need to change the aesthetics of socialism. I'm telling you this because revolution is not an orgasm. Revolution is not a climax. There's a movie. I'm sorry, not a movie. There's a famous opera by Richard Wagner. Do you like Wagner? I like Wagner. My wife and I went to see it when it was at the Met. It's a great opera. It's called Götterdämmerung, which means the twilight of the gods. It's like Armageddon, ancient Germanic Armageddon. And at the end of the opera, the hero is killed, stabbed in the back by a friend. And so Brunhilde, his widow, rides her horse into the funeral pyre, and the flames spread, and the whole world bursts into flames, and the whole world is destroyed in this climactic music. I mean, it's a great piece of music. It's very beautiful, and the Brunhilde immolation scene, the whole world is catching on fire, and it's triumphant music. Bum, 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 bum. It's this big explosion, and the whole world is burning, and then Brunhilde is sad that she lost her loved one, and she's riding the horse into the flames. It's amazing. It's great, great opera. But revolutions aren't like that. Actual revolutions, that's not how the Bolsheviks took power. The Bolsheviks aligned. They strategically aligned here. They strategically aligned there. They grew here. Chinese Communist Party, again, it was a series of tactical alliances and maneuvers. That's how revolutions actually happen. Since 1917, really since the time of Marx, revolutions have been getting further and further away from the salons. They've been getting further and further away from the revolutionary intelligentsia, further and further away from those middle-class people that have a lot of free time and are sitting there thinking about what? About art and music and all of that. When we say out of the movement to the masses, we're saying the same thing that Marx was telling the people in his day. It's the labor movement. It's those people building labor unions. They're the ones that are going to make the revolution. It's the same thing that Lenin is telling people during his time when he's building the Bolshevik Party of the new type. He says, if we're going to win this thing, we got to organize the working class, and we got to do it in a disciplined way. It's the same thing that Mao was doing when he was saying that it's the peasants that are going to lead the uprising. We need to become the voice of the peasant movement. That the ideals of the revolutionary intelligentsia, that's where Marxism started. And that left its stamp on Marxism. Marx was going around trying to prove he was the best socialist. He was the best of the revolutionary intelligentsia. But that's not where revolutions actually come from. And the ideals of the revolutionary intelligentsia are very middle class and very divorced from the broad masses of people. And in fact, the ideals of the revolutionary intelligentsia have now been hijacked by imperialism. The desire for a big explosion, this giant explosion that will just set everything right. This telling people to just unleash their rage, unleash your rage, be angry, tear things down. This unleashing of sexual impulses, just making everything about sex. Sex is exploding everywhere. The tradition of the French Revolution is now in service of imperialism. George Soros now owns that. Twitter and Facebook now own that. Revolution Incorporated, the State Department color revolution apparatus, now owns that. That is no longer the property of socialism. The aesthetics that people associate with socialism, those kids storming the barricade in Les Miserables, cancel culture, rage, destructive, sex obsession, all of that is not our property anymore. It's not our property anymore. The imperialists have purchased that and commodified it. It's theirs now. But the success of Marxism in Russia and in China and in everywhere else has always been getting away from the ideals of the revolutionary intelligentsia and becoming a vehicle for mass movements, for the labor movement, for the peasant movement, for the desire of the broad masses of people to express their aspirations, to have jobs and education, to improve their lives, to see their kids grow up in a healthier, more stable society than they had. Marxism as a movement has been constantly trying to get away from the revolutionary intelligentsia. That's what you need to understand. And the revolutionary intelligentsia, the middle class salon culture, the libidinal release is now the property of somebody else. It's been bought and sold. It is the property of imperialism. And they're using it to foment unrest. It's the Navalny kids in Russia. It's those Hong Kong rich kids trying to fight against their own country. It's, you know, it's the protesters against Gaddafi that set the stage for the imperialists to destroy Libya. They own that. The revolutionary intelligentsia is the property of the imperialists. But the success of Marxism has always been our ability to get out of the movement and to the masses, our ability to attach ourselves to really existing sentiments among the real people. What is it I'm constantly quoting at you all? Lenin said, we must go lower and deeper to the real masses. It is therefore our duty, if we wish to remain socialists, to go lower and deeper to the real masses. That's the essence of what Marxism means in our time. And this is what I'm trying to get you all to understand. And this is what I'm trying to communicate to you all. And that's why we don't have the left aesthetic. There's all this concern about aesthetics, right? Aesthetics. It's just such a big concern, right? Oh my God, they sound right wing. They sound right wing. It's because we reject the middle class revolutionary intelligentsia and its ideals. It desires chaos. We desire stability. It desires adventure. We desire effectiveness. What the broad masses of people aspire for, that only socialism can offer, and what the middle class wants, what their fantasy of libidinal release is, are different things. And so if you look at genuine socialist movements around the world, if you look at the big communist parties in places like India or African countries, you look at the Marxist governments in the world, like in China, like in Vietnam, like in Nicaragua, like in Cuba, they don't look anything like the hipster left. Because they're doing something different. And that's what I want you all to understand. And I was explaining it to you in a long, complicated way, but that's what I want you all to understand. That's what I want you all to get. And that's what CPI is about. It's based on this understanding. This is what out of the movement to the masses is about. That is what I want you all to understand. So on that note, names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Who is with us? Who's on the other side of the camera? And after this, I'm going to start answering super chats. So if there's anyone who has something they want me to talk about in the second half of our show, by all means, shoot me a super chat. We got Rice from Adelaide, Australia. We got Phil in Miami. We got Peter in Florida, Ryan in Oakland, Rupert in England, Christian in Bergen County, Sonny in Sydney. We got Ryan Clark in Kansas City, Dylan in Seattle, Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati, Four Oaks in North Carolina, Maddie in California, Mohsin from Iran, Salt Lake City, Utah, Kirby in Chattanooga, Juan in Quito, Ecuador, Mark from Mission, Texas, Terry Barnes in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, Valley in Ohio. We got White Chocolate in Gary, Indiana, John McCarthy in Chicago. We got Valen Annenson in Richmond, Virginia, Anthony in Detroit, Bob Swanick in Bob Troy, New York. Colin in Greensboro, Heidi in Edinburgh, Ian Chester in England. We got Newton Grace in North Carolina, Albany, New York, Anthony in Texas, Chris in Salt Lake City. Welcome, 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 everybody. We got NRJ in Baltimore. We got St. George, Utah. Josiah is out in Utah. We got Alex from Ypsilanti, Michigan. I've been out there. Years ago, I was in Ypsilanti, Michigan. We got NRJ in Baltimore. Good stuff, folks. Good stuff. We got a great crew of people here tonight. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the notifications bell. I always like to answer people's super chats. So I'm going to put some music on. It's going to be a Cardew song. We got Tyler's at Walmart. We got Peter, whose dad is from Ypsilanti. Go and subscribe to Peter's channel. Watch some of his very important documentaries. Go and subscribe to Tyler's channel. Tyler's been doing great stuff too. He does great shorts. Las Cruces in New Mexico, Benson, North Carolina. But any opinions on UBI versus job guarantee? All right. So there we go. So now I'm going to put some Cardew music on. I'm going to put on a song, the words of which will probably sound familiar to all of you. And then I will answer your questions. So yeah, keep the super chats rolling in. Here we go.
Countries must get prepared, but revolution is the main trend in the world today. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, and the people of various countries have been continuously revolutionary wars to defeat the aggressors. Danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of our countries must get prepared. But revolution is the main trend in the world today. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, and the people of various countries have been continuously revolutionary wars to defeat the aggressors. The danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of our countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. The danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of our countries must get prepared. But revolution is the main trend in the world today. Revolution is the main trend in the world today.
All right. Glad you all are here. And now I will. Oh, was there a super chat that went by that I just missed? Yeah. All right. There's one more super chat. All right. Okie dokie. Okay. So now I'm going to start answering people's super chat questions. Nixon's role in Bay of Pigs. Why was he ousted? Well, somebody's been reading the Yankee and Cowboy War, because that's how the book begins. This is a book I refer to quite a bit, the Yankee and Cowboy War. And it begins with one of the quotes from Nixon during the Watergate scandal. He says something to the effect of, people are going to start asking questions about Bay of Pigs. I better step down. What was happening was that, Richard Nixon was the vice president, and John F. Kennedy was running for president. Nixon was planning the Bay of Pigs invasion, and then it happened just after Kennedy took office. And it appears, some people speculate, that maybe Nixon did something to sabotage the Bay of Pigs invasion, to hurt Kennedy or something like that. But there's something that Nixon was afraid of the world finding out about the Bay of Pigs invasion. I personally think that Nixon was removed because Nixon wouldn't play ball with neoliberalism. There was a section of the U.S. ruling class that was against him for a while. There was a fight in the ruling class between the Pentagon and the FBI and the CIA and the Eastern establishment. The New York Times was always against Nixon. The Washington Post was against Nixon. But I think ultimately Nixon wouldn't play ball with neoliberalism, because right when Nixon was brought down, that was when neoliberal economics conquered the White House. Alan Greenspan, he was appointed by Gerald Ford. Ayn Rand came to the White House to take the oath with him. Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld both were appointed as soon as Gerald Ford came in. It was a turning point. When Gerald Ford, the only president in American history who nobody voted for, right? Not as vice president, not as president. When Gerald Ford came into office after Nixon was forced to step down, Gerald Ford was a Republican. He was a conservative, but that was a turning point. That was when neoconservative strategists and neoliberal economists had kind of seized control of the Republican Party. And that I think that Nixon, his advocacy of a guaranteed minimum income, his creation of a lot of government programs and stuff, Nixon was the Bonapartist strongman who'd come into office to stabilize capitalism amid a political crisis in the United States. They brought him in and he crushed the Black Panthers. He fired my old boss, Ramsey Clark, and he let the FBI do whatever they wanted, let them crush the Black Panthers ruthlessly. He then, at the same time, he escalated the war in Vietnam, and then he ended it when it was clear that there was no way for the USA to win. And he, established relations with China. He started the process, right? He went to China. He was the first U.S. president to visit the People's Republic. He met with Mao, and that he was starting the USA on the road to stability by taking dramatic action. And then, from what we understand, once the country was back in order, which by 1974, the country was stable again, they didn't need a strong man. And his authoritarian tendencies and his centralization of power in the executive branch and his refusal to go along with neoliberal economics, they weren't going to have it. And so they ousted him, right? Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lori. I really do appreciate it. I'm glad you enjoy my presentations. Very good. Yeah. So there you go. So there you go. Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard opposing the Restrict Act is a very good thing. Tulsi Gabbard is right on so many issues. I get really tired of people that have it in their head. Well, it's like, Caleb, Tulsi Gabbard supports Israel. Of course she does. She's like she's a U.S. military person. She's practically a Republican at this point. Like, it's not that I think Tulsi Gabbard is amazing. It's that she has a number of amazingly good takes in addition to her politics. Historically, she's been Islamophobic. She's gotten better on that since since over the last couple of years. But yeah, when she first took office, she was quite Islamophobic. She came out of the military, but she supports Julian Assange. She opposes the Restrict Act. She opposes escalating with Russia. She opposes escalating with China. She wants to negotiate with North Korea. She supports Medicare for all. It's like, of all the voices within the U.S. political establishment, she's one of the best. She represents one faction within the deep state that wants to de-escalate wars, probably a faction within the Pentagon that is interested in trading with Russia and China. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I will get one tomorrow. It's a little late for that tonight. And the fact that she speaks the way she does about Julian Assange, about the Restrict Act, about the attacks on our civil liberties, about, the need to not escalate with China, not escalate further with Russia. I mean, she's really good. The stuff she did around Syria, visiting Syria, meeting with the Syrian president. Tulsi Gabbard is one of the best out there, and she's miles ahead of AOC, like miles ahead of AOC. Miles and miles ahead of AOC. And on top of that, she's also miles and miles ahead of Jacobin and any of those folks. So Tulsi Gabbard opposing the Restrict Act, again, it's one of the great positions that she takes. And that's why she's so important. And people who think she's not important, I mean, it's weird. It's very, very weird. I like Tulsi Gabbard a lot. And apparently I influence her. Let's play that clip. I just can't get over this clip, folks. You gave me an excuse to play this clip. I can't get over this clip, and I find it to be hilarious. This made my day. It was Liam Space LaRouche who first sent me this. I couldn't believe it when I saw it. I will never stop playing this clip.
To promote Russian and North Korean foreign policies. She may not understand that, but she's being used by people like Dennis Kucinich and others to do that. She also has some connections to the Center for Political Innovation, which is a very pro-Russian outfit run by a man called Caleb Maupin, who used to be in the Workers' World Party. She's on the...
Let's do this again. I still can't get over this.
Center for Political Innovation, others to do that. She also has some connections to the Center for Political Innovation, which is a very pro-Russian outfit run by a man called Caleb Maupin, who used to be in the Workers' World Party. She's on the...
I'll take it. I will take it. That's amazing. And who's to say it's not true, right? I have met her before. There are people in my circles who are close to her. I'm not close to her. I've met her once in my life, but there are people who I'm friendly with who are, in a position they could call her up on the phone. So who's to say it's wrong? She clearly was in somebody close to her probably read my book on Kamala Harris, because the way she talked about Kamala Harris in her interview with Jordan Peterson really followed my analysis like exactly. So, who's to say? All right, next question. Why do some Western Marxists only believe in workers owning the factory and not a revolutionary state? Because of the fact that they have basically been... Well, first of all, that's called syndicalism, right? The idea of the workers just owning the factory, no revolutionary state. That's been around a long time. It's called syndicalism, right? And the syndicalists, they didn't vote. They didn't believe in any politics. Their focus was only on the struggle between the employer and the factory owner. It was a wing of the labor movement. It was a wing of the Marxist movement historically. It's associated with anarchism. Right? It's called syndicalism. But especially more recently, there's been a push by people like Richard Wolff and others to focus on, the worker is not paid the full value of his labor, which is true, right? Surplus value, according to Marxism. And that's all there is to Marxism. And they're missing overproduction. They're missing the tendency of the falling rate of profit. They're missing all the irrationality of capitalism. It is a deviation, I would argue, right? The idea that we can have cooperative capitalism, right? That's not the Marxist understanding. That's the syndicalist understanding. So it's wrong, but it's safer. And actually, I would argue, in my view, the synthetic left, right? Not Richard Wolff. Richard Wolff is a good guy. He's just doing what he can do, right? What he thinks is the right thing to do, what he's doing. He's a good guy. I'm not talking about him this way. But I do believe that there, and I talk about this in my book, that in Nazi Germany and in fascist Italy, they claimed to have worker control of the factories. They didn't. Right? But they called it, in Italy, they called it a corporate. That's where the term corporate state comes from. Mussolini said, we don't have to have socialism, but at every factory we have this thing called a corporate, where a leader of the fascist party and the factory owner and a leader of the workers of the labor union, they all get together and they figure out how to make the factory work for the good of Italy. Right? And they called it, super capitalism. They called it national syndicalism. In Spain, that's what they called it. Franco called his system national syndicalism. They had a similar thing where it's like every factory had a representative who met with the capitalist who owned the factory and also got a special medal from the fascist government. National syndicalism, national socialism, corporatism. It's all like a phony worker cooperative scheme, except profits are still in command. All right. Fascists do this, especially when you have a more state-controlled situation. The main thing is profits are still running the economy. All right. It still functions in the interest of the property of the owners, but the government steps in to give workers more facility, or the government is helping facilitate it more. And that in a fascist model, where you're driving down the population, you're driving down the living standards to stabilize capitalism, you have to impose strict controls on the economy. And usually you stamp out small businesses and you ensure, the rule of big monopolies. And one thing that I think is a part of the woke fascist model is that they want some kind of national syndicalism for America. They want some kind of, worker co-op scheme for America. And that, they want the absolute rule of Amazon, the absolute rule of Walmart, the absolute rule of these big monopolies. They want to stamp out the small businesses because that's the people that oppose them. They believe in growth. But at the same time, they want to say it's social justice. And honestly, a lot of this worker co-op stuff is peace wages. The Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 was a huge victory for the working class movement in America. It says your employer must pay you minimum wage. Doesn't matter, right? Any incentive pay, whatever. But if you work the hours, your employer must pay you the wage. That's the law in the United States. That was a huge victory for the working class movement because there were many employers before that. And if they had a tire factory, well, you get paid for how many tires you make. And if they don't get any orders for the tires that day, you don't get any money, right? Could you imagine working in a coffee shop and no one comes in that day, so you get nothing? That's what these stupid worker co-op schemes would have happen, right? You're a co-owner, right? It's a peace wage. That's all it is. It's a peace wage, right? You can dress it up as all that. And I think that that's the fantasy of some of these ultra rich when they have their degrowth fascist model of driving down living standards, etc. And so they want Amazon to have an absolute monopoly. No more bookstores. We don't need that. No more hardware store. You get rid of all of that. Amazon has an absolute monopoly. But it's social justice, don't you know? Because the employee handbook has a bunch of anti-racist training buzzwords in it, and all the workers are co-owners, meaning you don't know what you're going to get paid that week because it depends on how Amazon stock goes up and down. And Jeff Bezos still gets millions of dollars, and your manager still makes more than you do, but your wage, you're like a co-owner, because if Amazon stock goes up, then your wages go up. And if Amazon stock goes down, it goes down. And you get paid based on how well Amazon is doing. You get a share of the profits. It's stupid. And that's what I think, I think that's what, Jeff Bezos and Carlos Slim and Bill Gates and some of them, that's what they want. They want national syndicalism, national socialism, what is it? Corporate statism, some kind of weird degrowth fascist model in the United States they'll claim is socially, it's so socially conscious. And it's just a peace wage. It's called peace wages. The fact that in 1938, Roosevelt passed a law that said your employer must pay you a minimum wage, and all incentive pay, anything else has to be on top of that minimum wage. That was a huge victory. That was a huge victory. There you go. Opinions on universal basic income versus jobs guarantee. I think a jobs guarantee is better, right? But, they're not necessarily opposites, right? Let me say this, first of all. The concept of a universal basic income in and of itself is good. The idea that everyone would have some kind of income so that if they couldn't find a job or whatever, they weren't starving, I'm for that. However, most of the voices that push universal basic income have another agenda because they frame it up this way. The way they frame it up is they'll get rid of all the government agencies, right? No more Department of Labor, no more unemployment insurance, no more Medicare, no more Medicaid, none of that. All that exists is everyone gets an automatic computer bank transaction of $1,000 a month. And Milton Friedman proposed this. A lot of neoliberal economists have proposed this because they're like, all right, fine. We have to have a welfare state. Instead of hiring thousands and thousands of government employees who all get a decent salary and have union representation and have benefits, why don't we just have the welfare state be an automatic bank transfer? Right? Just have it be an automatic bank transfer that everyone gets every month. Right? And then we can fire all the Department of Labor employees. We can fire all the Medicare employees, Medicaid employees. We can get rid of all the government jobs facilitating the welfare state. And that would be a huge loss for the economy. All of that money that's paid out to government employees facilitating those programs would be gone. And then on top of that, everyone just gets this bank transfer, $1,000 a month. Okay. Then it just starts, and this is the evil thing, and everybody knows this. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Sathari. Yeah. And eventually, it just takes one group you hate, right? Let's take the most hated group, convicted pedophiles, right? Every citizen gets it. So convicted pedophile, he gets out of jail, and just like every other citizen, he's entitled to $1,000 a month. Just takes one politician to get up there. Why are we paying $1,000 a month to convicted pedophiles? Do you support giving money to pedophiles? No, we don't support. Everyone, and who's going to stand up for the pedophiles and say, oh, I think we should give $1,000 to pedophiles? Nobody. So they pass a law in Florida. No universal basic income for convicted pedophiles. You have to keep in mind, now there's no Department of Labor. Now there's no Social Security. There's no food stamps. There's nothing. So those guys are out on their ass. They're fucked. Right? And then, after they do it to pedophiles, and they say, what about people who use drugs? Yeah, why should we give $1,000 to people who use drugs? We're not going to fund these loser drug addicts' habits. Everyone who's ever tested positive for drugs, take it away. Right? And who's going to get there and say, well, no, people who use drugs should get, who's going to say that? Nobody. Boom. So now all people who've ever tested positive for drug use, they don't get any money. You can see where this is going. This is a way to move us toward the libertarian ideal, right? What libertarian economists, what the Austrian economists really want is no welfare state. They believe that you should be on your ass. There should be no food stamps. There should be no Medicare. There should be nothing, right? They believe this, and they state it very openly, right? All of that's communism somehow. It should be every man for himself. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Charles Murray, the guy who wrote The Bell Curve, he's famous for that racial pseudoscience and eugenics. He's an advocate of universal basic income. And he openly says it's to get rid of government bureaucracy. He wants to get rid of all the good paying government jobs facilitating the welfare state. Well, I'm not opposed to the concept of a universal basic income, but many people like Charles Murray, like Milton Friedman, advocate it for very bad reasons. I would be for a universal basic income if we kept all the other social programs. I would be for a universal basic income in addition to keeping all the other social programs. The economic consequences of getting rid of food stamps, not just all the foods, take that away from the food industry in the United States, right? Do you know how much food would not be sold imagine if they got rid of food stamps, right? That would already be disastrous for the U.S. economy, just getting rid of the food stamps. But then all the people whose job it is to run the food stamps program, all of them no longer have a government job and an income coming on. That would be a disaster. If you did that to every social program, like our economy would crash. That would be millions and millions of government workers out on their ass, millions and millions and millions of dollars in spending power taken away from the American consumer. It would be an economic disaster, right? And there are people like Charles Murray and Milton Friedman who see universal basic income as a road to doing that. If you want to give everyone an automatic bank deposit of $1,000 a month and you keep the social programs, I'm for it. And don't tell me it wouldn't work, right? Oh, that wouldn't work, Caleb. Libya did it, right? There's many countries that did that. Saudi Arabia does it, right? In Saudi Arabia, if you are a Saudi citizen, because Saudi Arabia has a huge amount of money, you get your bonus from the king. And compared to what the king gets from the oil money, it's nothing. But every Saudi citizen gets a little bank deposit every month. And do people in Saudi Arabia still work? Yes. In fact, they have guest worker slaves all over Saudi Arabia. But every Saudi citizen, you go to most countries that are Middle Eastern oil countries, the citizens, you go to Qatar, right? You go to the United Arab Emirates, the citizens get an oil check every month. And they're not, oh, no one will ever work again. No, they all work. There's business there. Come on. Right? I mean, this is the liberty, that's the line. Well, if everyone just gets $1,000 a month, no one will work. Do you think everyone's going to just go, oh, well, I only want to make $1,000 a month? No, it's a subsidy, right? It makes sure people don't starve. And then all the money they make that month is in addition to what they get. So the idea that everyone getting $1,000 boost, would just wreck the economy and everyone would just be lazy, and no, that's not how things work, right? The idea that the only reason people work is they're afraid of starving, and so we need people to be afraid of starving in order to keep the economy going. That is awful, right? That is an awful delusion. No. If everyone got an automatic $1,000 in their bank account every month, that would be good for the economy because people would spend it. Right? If you give it to the broad masses of people, they will spend it. Now, if you give it to rich people, they just keep it in their bank account, but they'll spend it. If you were king for a day, what changes would you make in the world? All right. It would be good for the economy, but that's my criticism about UBI as opposed to a jobs guarantee, a guaranteed job, right? State guaranteed employment. That would be a very good thing. But the question is doing what? What would you have the people do? You'd want to have them do something productive, right? You want to have them build infrastructure, build high-speed rail, hire the unemployed to build things that will make a stronger country, right? I think what Roosevelt did with the Works Progress Administration, that's a great idea, right? It's part of our 4-point plan, so I'm for it. All right, next question. All right, American billionaires like Elon Musk are getting scared of AI and want to suspend its research. Your thoughts? No. I mean, you can't stop technological progress. Doesn't work that way. AI is coming. The problem isn't AI, it's capitalism. The problem is that under capitalism, AI leads to displacing workers. But in a rational society, AI would be amazing. It would lead to less necessary labor on the part of human beings. It would lead to the productivity of those of us who do work vastly increasing. You can't hold back technological progress. You can't. You cannot turn back the clock. It's like when a baby is born, you can't shove it back in the womb. No. The problem isn't AI. The problem is capitalism. And that's what we need to understand. AI shows why the banks, factories, and industries and the economy needs to be organized for the profits, needs to be organized for the people, not in the interest of profit. We need to get rid of the chaos of the market. But technological advancement is a good thing. Capitalism, the system where your only value is your ability to sell yourself to a boss, that's a bad thing. Get rid of a society where your only value is your ability to rent yourself out to a boss. Get to a society where we have a rationally organized economy and we utilize human labor rationally so that we all get wealthier. Yeah, and AI wouldn't be a problem, right? I really doubt we're going to have a Terminator-like situation where the robots start, eating our brains. And, I really doubt that's what's going to happen. I just think it's a matter of displacing jobs, which under capitalism, sure, it leads to a prolonged crisis of overproduction. But, in a rational socialist society, AI would be a great thing. We are not against technology. The problem is not the machine. The problem is not technological advancement. The problem is profits in command. All right. How can neocons claim to be objective when they say Western accomplishments are a sign of virtue, but deny communist accomplishments? Exactly. You're exactly right. And they do the opposite too. Communist atrocities are proof that communism is evil. And Western atrocities, they just happen, right? It's like, Stalin had gulags. Stalin executed a lot of people. So therefore, communism is evil. But, America killed all the Native Americans and had Jim Crow segregation and lynched black people and the transatlantic slave trade and the Vietnam War and the Korean War. But those are just mistakes. That had nothing to do with capitalism. They do it goes the other way too, right? Anything the Soviet Union invents, it doesn't really, right? Everything American capitalism invents is proof of how great American capitalism is. And everything bad American capitalism has done, it's not important. Everything good the Soviet Union, everything bad the Soviet Union ever did is it's inherent in communism. It's totally ridiculous. It really is ridiculous. And it's infuriating to argue with these people because they're just appealing to the popular bias. One of the most annoying memes I've ever seen is the iPhone meme, right? And people say, oh my God, how can any communist use an iPhone? iPhones are proof of how great capitalism is. The first mobile phone was patented in 1957 by Leonid Kaprianovich, a Soviet engineer. Oh boy. Your phone uses GPS to help you get around. GPS. The first satellite ever invented was called the Sputnik. Was launched by the Soviet Union. It's just like, it's like, oh no, it's and even the computer revolution in the West was a government operation. Alan Turing's decoder machine. Did he make the decoder machine because a capitalist said, by golly, I'm going to hire that Alan Turing guy to make me a decoder machine, gee golly? Is that what happened? Did the market create Alan Turing's decoder machine? No. The military. The British government grabbed him and forced him to make the decoder machine because it would defeat the Nazis. Fact. And look, do your research. Google, Microsoft, all these corporations all got huge subsidies and loans from the CIA, from the National Security Agency, from the military. Amazon would not exist if the military, the U.S. military, the Pentagon had not facilitated it. Google it. Read about how Amazon basically depends on the U.S. military to exist. It gets a huge subsidy from the U.S. military and from the U.S. Postal Service. Yeah, it's like, oh no, computers are proof of how great capitalism is. We wouldn't have computers if the market had just been left to its own devices. And the Soviet Union, to their credit, they made their own home computer system. Right? No one ever talks about that. They actually, despite not having anywhere near the resources that Western capitalism had, 1985, the Soviet Union had developed a desktop home computer system. Despite the big treaty that forbid the Soviet Union from getting any Western technology, they still, with their own scientists and their own technology, made their own home computer system. So libertarians, they have this delusional understanding of world economics, and it's just dependent on communists are the bad guys, and no one will ever stick up for them. And it's infuriating. Jacobin has an article refuting the iPhone thing, doesn't mention the Soviet Union inventing the iPhone because they don't want to defend the Stalinists, right? And it just depends on there not being one of us in the room, right? There's not enough tankies out there. So libertarians go, communism never accomplished anything. You'd have to be retarded to be a communist. Only an idiot would ever think communism would do anything because it's always failed everywhere and led to nothing but death and destruction. They say that. And then you get you get a 20-year-old in a Trotsky t-shirt who goes, but that wasn't real socialism. Real socialism is when I start a pencil factory with my friends and we share the profits and it's lots and lots of fun. And I don't want to invent things because working hard is no fun because you don't get to play. Yay! They find and of course the libertarian wins the argument because the libertarian said something that made sense and was based on data. And the 20-year-old in the Trotsky t-shirt says, I want to have fun. I want to open a pencil factory. I hate Stalin too, but I love fun. I mean, it's oh God, it's awful. It's really, really awful, right? And like people call me a libertarian. And it's like I'm the opposite of a libertarian. I advocate communism, but people call me a libertarian again because he uses libertarian aesthetics. How do I use libertarian aesthetics? He's always talking about like space and historical progress. Oh boy. And he always cites economic data. Yeah, because I'm arguing about economics. When you argue about economics, you should probably cite economic data. Well, that's fascist. Only fascists cite economic data. Oh God, these people are just. A couple super chats went by. Are people missing the broader implications of Roe versus Wade by focusing on abortion? Thrown out surveillance state. Oh. Okay. And what's the next one? Can you do a stream on historical social anomy and societal collapse? I don't know what that is. Collapses can be recovered from, but we need to build communities. Historical collapse can be recovered. All right. Very, very good. All right. Okay. Next one. If I was king for a day, what changes would I make in the world? I would make dramatic changes in how we treat children. I think the way we treat our children as a society is not good. We often don't invest in children. We don't treat them as if they have potential. And a lot of people grow up not believing that they're capable. And that needs to be dramatically changed. And a lot of the way we treat our children in the United States is very backward and inconsistent with modern science. We set these kids up for a life of defeat, a life of victimization. And And we need to treat every child as if they are full of potential, as if they have the ability to be the next Einstein. They have the ability to be a great inventor or something like that. And we need to see every child as a potential asset to the country, right? When we provide an education to a child, we're not giving them a handout. We're investing in our future as a country. The same goes for providing employment, providing healthcare. We talk about these things in the wrong way, right? It's like we're giving them a handout. Oh, here we go. But that's not the right way to view these things. We need to view them in terms of wanting to help the country overall by helping the individuals who make up the country. What is a country if it's not a collection of people, right? And so when we invest in our kids, when we invest in the next generation, we're investing in the future of our country. And we forget that sometimes, So there you go. All righty. All right. Are people missing the broader implications of Roe versus Wade, focusing on abortion? What about the surveillance state and the right to privacy? I can see what you're getting at there. All right. The right to privacy, as understood by constitutional scholars, means that in a situation that it means there are some things that are not the government's business, right? That's what it means, is basically you have the right to be you and no one mess with you. And that means not have the government see it, but also just means the government doesn't get involved, right? That to some degree or other, the government can't pass a law against nose rings. It's your body. It's your nose. You want to get a nose ring, the government can't pass a law against it because of your right to privacy, your bodily autonomy, your individual rights. Unless nose rings are proven as a threat to public health or a violation of someone else's rights, the government has no business passing a law against nose rings. I think there was a Supreme Court justice who said, your freedom ends where my nose starts. Meaning, you don't have the right to, so people have the right to their own privacy, right? And that doesn't just mean people not seeing it. It means that your body can't be imposed on, your business can't be imposed on, right? That your individual human autonomy can't be imposed on. That's what it means. Right to privacy doesn't necessarily mean like people not seeing stuff. It also means, autonomy, right? And abortion, the Roe versus Wade ruling, was based on the understanding that, look, what a woman does inside of her body is her business. And that since we cannot legally prove that this fetus constitutes a life, and we cannot legally argue that we have to protect the right of the fetus, this is a woman's right to privacy, what she chooses to do with her own body. That was the ruling. So people are asking, does the overturning of Roe versus Wade threaten the overall concept of right to privacy in terms of surveillance and other things? Fair question. I think that it probably won't. I think other issues in terms of right to privacy are going to be decided on different cases by the Supreme Court. Because our right to privacy in terms of freedom from surveillance has long gone. That's completely long gone. Look at the Edward Snowden revelations. But government seizing property, again, eminent domain now. It's ridiculous, right? The Constitution of the United States says the government can seize property, right? They just have to pay you for it, right? However, there were some Supreme Court rulings around eminent domain that were utterly ridiculous, where they were claiming that, seizing property and then giving it to private companies was allowed. Well, no, it has to be for the government, right? The government can't seize your property and give it to someone else. But the Supreme Court said, yes, it could, right? That, there was a town that seized a bunch of people's houses and then gave it to a private company that wanted to build a shopping mall. And this went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, yeah, it's in the public interest because the tax money will go up, tax revenue will increase. And it's like, that's not what eminent domain is. Eminent domain is the government can seize your property to do government stuff and they have to pay you for it. But now eminent domain, according to the U.S. Supreme Court, means government can seize your property and give it to someone else because they think it's in the interest of the community. And so, I mean, it's, again, like, how much right to privacy do we even have now? Right now, I think the only thing that's really left is it's inadmissible in court, right? If they tap your phone without a warrant, you go to court, they can't use that as evidence because they didn't have a warrant to get it. Maybe that will be the next thing they get rid of. I don't know. But I mean, at this point, there's so much illegal surveillance going on. I mean, the average person in the United States is photographed like 50 times a day or something like that. I mean, every time you go to the bank, the ATM, there's a camera in that ATM that takes a picture of you. Did you ever consent to get your picture taken? No, but you probably signed something when you got the bank account that said, when I go to the ATM, I'm getting my picture taken. Right? There's all kinds of government monitoring. Facebook, they turn over people's private information to the government all the time. Any Facebook message you send is not private because all they have to do is go to Facebook and say, hey, we want to see so-and-so's private messages. And Facebook just says, oh, okay. And they don't ever have to tell you. Same for Google. Send a Gmail. Well, you might think it's private, but the government at any point can just go to Google and say, hey, we want to look at Joe Bob's messages. And Google never has to tell you, and they just turn it over to the government, right? These things happen. So how much privacy do we even have? I mean, the Roe versus Wade ruling is a turning point because it says around the issue of abortion, you don't have the right to privacy around that issue at a federal level. And I don't agree with it. I'm pro-choice. But I think it really only applies to that. These other issues have already been decided or will be decided in other cases by the Supreme Court. Social anonymity is instability resulting from the breakdown of STDs or values or a lack of purpose or ideals. For example, increased in mass shootings. I don't know enough about social anonymity. What I will say about societal collapse is that I think, yes, the United States is coming apart as a country. That's happening. Our economy is coming apart, but at the same time, there are other centers of wealth and power in the world. And so just because the old order in the United States comes apart doesn't mean we have to go full societal collapse. If we had a government come to power amid the collapse of our country that favored multipolarity, that wanted to join the new emerging economy, wanted to join the Belt and Road and the Eurasian Economic Union, rebuild the U.S. economy in coordination with Russia and China, have a strong government of action, we could bounce right back, right? This isn't like Rome, right? When Rome fell, it was like everything was so far apart from everything else. It's not like that now. With technology and all of that, the world is much smaller, as they say. And so, yes, the old system is dying, but that doesn't mean we have to go to Mad Max before we get the new system. And one of the scary things I find is that there is this memo that's been sent out on the left and on the right that, we're going to go to Mad Max and you should just embrace it and buy a bunch of Alex Jones survival gear if you're on the right, and celebrate it as the end of Western capitalism and the end of an evil racist society. Burn it down, tear it down if you're on the left. And it's like, no, we don't have to go to Mad Max. We don't have to go to Mad Max, right? Yes, the old order is dying, but we can very easily, if we had the political will, if we had the forces to build the anti-imperialist United Front, we could quickly transition to joining the new emerging global alternative. We could join a multipolar world. We could do that. There's no reason we have to go to the Mad Max scenario, right? Where it's warlords battling. There's no reason we have to do that. And the fact that there's so many people who are just trying to drill into our heads that we have to, it's just going to be Mad Max, Caleb. It's going to be warlords. We're going to be the next Somalia. No. It doesn't have to be that way. We just have to get our shit together here and build a real anti-monopoly coalition, a real united front to reboot our economy and get our economy to join the emerging alternative economy that's growing around the world. That's what we need to do. We can either do it or don't. You know, but I think most people are going to want that. People really don't want Mad Max. I said in my speech at the conference we did, the recent CPI conference, I made the point, which is an important point. I made the point that, you know, you say you want the USA to collapse, but you really like it when the water comes out of the faucet, when you turn the faucet on. When a society collapses, that doesn't happen. You know, you really like the electricity working. That doesn't happen when a society collapses. You don't want to live through a societal collapse. Anyone who lived through the fall of the Soviet Union will tell you what a nightmare it was. Anyone who lived through the fall of a socialist country, right, and saw a socialist country collapse, right, saw the government just collapse, saw the society around you just collapse. It's bad. You don't want that to happen. You do not want that to happen. Go and watch some videos about what the fall of the Soviet Union was like. Go and watch some videos about, you don't want that to happen. Okay? And as much as there's an effort to inculcate in us, both on the left and the right, and somehow that's a good thing, you don't want that to happen. We need to be the voice of reason and put forward a program to bring the United States out of the crisis and to socialism and to breaking out of imperialism. All right, folks, a new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night, everybody. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Dare to struggle, dare to win.